Well, hello and good evening everyone, and I would like to take this opportunity to welcome everyone along here this night to the Benarty Centre. I'd like to introduce you to your next speaker, who is Morgwn Davies. Morgwn works in NHS Scotland for over 30 years. He has been a trade union member for 30 years, and Morgwn was a staff representative for 12 years. He is one of the main administrators of the Yes NHS in Scotland Facebook campaign, and Morgwn is a firm believer in independence. Ladies and gentlemen, Morgwn Davies.
Hello. It's a great pleasure and an honour. I feel slightly out of place with the lineup of speakers that you have tonight and you've had previously and have in the future. The request for a speaker came into the Facebook page that I'm one of the managers for Yes NHS in Scotland. I noticed on the publicity thing it says NHS in Scotland, and obviously I don't represent NHS in Scotland, it is Yes NHS in Scotland. I asked my fellow page manager if he would come and speak because he's had more experience, but he lives further west in Glasgow, so he suggested that I did it. Now what I didn't tell the organisers, because I didn't want to worry them until now, is that I've never actually given a political speech in my life before. But I thought, how hard can it be? I've seen other people do it. So we'll either be alright tonight or it'll be a complete disaster. Either way, it should be fun. I mean, I've done canvassing, leafleting, everything else, so I thought I might as well actually get up there and give a speech. So before we get to the main part, just some background on the Yes NHS in Scotland page. I mean, this illustrates the depths of the Yes campaign. I didn't create it. A chap I've never met before, who lives in Perth, started the group, asked for help in posting things on it and taking it forward. He's subsequently had very little to do with it because he's got a young family and a lot of work commitments. There's another couple of people helping. One of them has some formal role with Yes Scotland, but I've never quite found out exactly what it is. And he's planning on setting up a Yes Scotland, Yes NHS group, which will be a more formal group than a Facebook page. Because I mean, the reality is that this is at the moment just a Facebook page. And we've got over 5,000 likes, which sounds fairly impressive until you think about the number of people that actually work in the NHS and the fact that everybody in Scotland at some point or the other will use the NHS. That's enough of the background. I'm going to talk about the differences between the NHS Scotland and the NHS. Like a lot of bodies in England, you'll notice that it is the NHS, because they don't feel the need to say the English NHS, because obviously we all know that the NHS, like the Football Association, like the Rugby Football Union, must be English by definition. Now, it is true that in the event of a no vote, we're not suddenly going to find that NHS Scotland is privatised. That's not going to happen. But there is a real subtle and insidious threat to the future of the NHS Scotland. And that's what we will come to. But what I'm not going to do tonight is stand up here and tell you that everything in the NHS Scotland is absolutely wonderful, because you'll come back at me with examples where it's not been wonderful, where it's failed, where it's given less than perfect service. No organisation as large as NHS Scotland can ever be 100% perfect. And it needs to constantly strive to improve itself so that it improves. And we need to take control of it. That's one of the reasons we need independence, is to take control of the future of it. Now, I know it's a cliche now that a week is a long time in politics, but we're going to go back to the 1940s, which is where it all starts. Now, interestingly, the other week, we discovered that Better Together announced that they were launching an NHS Together group. Now, I can only assume this is because they have absolutely no knowledge of how the NHS within the UK has worked since the 1940s and how it was set up. Because if they did, they wouldn't call it NHS Together. The NHS has never been together across the UK, even before devolution. The media in Westminster usually give the impression that one NHS was created in 1948, but there were in fact two separate Acts of Parliament. There was the National Health Service Act 1946, which created the National Health Service in England and Wales under the control of the Secretary of State for Health. And the National Health Service Scotland Act of 1947, which created the National Health Service in Scotland. This was under the control of the Scottish Office and the Secretary of State for Scotland. And the Parliament in Northern Ireland at Stormont passed the Health Services Act, which created the Health Service in Northern Ireland in 1948. Now the NHS in Wales was, this makes me sad, was part of NHS England until 1969 when it passed the control of the Secretary of State for Wales. After devolution, the control of the NHS in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland passed the devolved assemblies. So even before devolution, NHS Scotland was separate from NHS England and was under control of the Scottish Office and the Secretary of State for Scotland. So you might say to me, in which case, why does it matter if we vote no? That won't really affect anything, everything will stay the same. Well, if only if it was as simple as that. There have been really radical changes that we have yet to see the full impact of on the NHS in England. The Health and Social Care Bill in 2012 was a landmark piece of legislation in what it did. It removed the responsibility on the Secretary of State for Health in England to actually provide a comprehensive health service, which begs the question of why you need the Secretary of State for Health if he doesn't actually have anything to do with the provision of health anymore. And since 1948, the funding for the NHS came from central government from general taxation. And that's all due to change. The 2012 Act has repealed the requirements, as I say, for the Secretary of State for Health in England to actually provide a health service. Instead, what they have in England now is new commissioning clinical groups, and they will determine who gets publicly financed care. The commissioning groups do not have to have a duty, they don't have a duty to provide a comprehensive range of services, but only such services or facilities as they consider appropriate. So they don't think that there's a need for the service, they won't provide it, or if it costs too much, they won't provide it. Now, they recognise that that might create problems, so the next part it takes a bit of genius because they decided that local authorities would become providers of the last resort. If they can't get health groups to provide the care, they will get the local authorities to provide it, on top of everything else they do. So that's what the Health Secretary will step in and do. He will force the local authorities to provide the service. There's only a vague requirement on the clinical commissioning groups that have regard to the needs. They have a need to reduce inequalities between patients, but not a requirement to provide universal access. They don't have to worry about whether everybody can access the service they provide. The duty to provide services free of charge will no longer exist. The power to determine which services they'll be charged for will be the clinical commissioning groups and not the Secretary of State for Health. The government will have no direct control over most of the NHS in England. And as of the 1st of April this year, all the existing trusts in England were abolished and they were all turned into foundation trusts, and they are able, in fact encouraged, to enter into joint ventures with private companies and to distribute surpluses to for-profit companies. Now these are services that have been transferred to local authorities in England so that they have to pay for them rather than private companies pay for them. Immunisation, mental health care, dental, public health, sexual health services, and so on. There's quite a few in there. And the Act also abolished rules making certain health services mandatory in England. So there's no requirement on anybody to actually provide some of the services. And this is a catch-all phrase, that these are the following services that are no longer required by law to be provided free of charge. It's quite a list. Services and facilities for pregnant women, women who are breastfeeding, services for both younger and older children, services for the prevention of illness, care of persons suffering from illness and their aftercare, ambulance services, services for people with mental illnesses, dental public health services, sexual health services. I don't think they missed anything out of there that they could possibly charge for. I think they covered everything. Now, the coalition government says that the principle of the Health and Social Care Act is to give patients choice. But actually what it gives is it gives the service providers that are going to bring in the choice to choose the patients that they will treat. If it's too expensive to treat them, they won't treat them. And you should know that most of the healthcare companies that are being commissioned, I mean, there's already about 1 to 2 billion worth of commission going on out there, seem to be owned by hedge fund companies who, by pure coincidence, seem to have donated large sums of money to the Tory party recently. I'm absolutely sure that there's nothing improper there. I'm sure that wouldn't be the case. Now, in contrast, in Scotland, NHS Scotland is still free at the point of use. And one of the interesting things is that Wales, Northern Ireland and Scotland all abolished prescription charges as soon as they could. I suppose slightly to our shame, we weren't the first to do it. Wales, either Wales or Northern Ireland beat us to it. They both did it before us, actually. But only England still has prescription charges. The NHS in Scotland is still accountable to the Cabinet Secretary for Health and Wellbeing, who is accountable to the Scottish Parliament and ultimately to the Scottish people. And there's no plans to privatise any parts of or to start charging for services in Scotland. Now, NHS Scotland still holds to the principles at the very heart of the foundation of the NHS, as expressed by Ian Bevan, that illness is neither an indulgence for which people have to pay, nor an offence for which they should be penalised, but a misfortune, the cost of which should be shared by the community. And that's what I personally believe that a health service should be. Does it matter even privatising NHS and charges for service? You know, you might say, what impact will it have on NHS Scotland? We'll carry on even if we won't know running our own NHS Scotland. Well, there are several threats to it. One of them is where the Barnett formula is calculated. Now, this was put in as a short-term fix, and like a lot of political short-term fixes, it's still with us. It started in 1978, as I say, a short-term fix for a particular problem, and it still exists. Now, if the government hives off the NHS in England and no longer funds it out of government funding, the government might ultimately still be paying the same amount of money, or more, in fact, for the same service. But because of the way it's accounted for, it won't show up on the direct government expenditure. So the amount of money that the Barnett formula is calculated on will be reduced. So the block grant we get will be less. Now, we already know that there's a possibility that they're talking about £4 billion worth of cuts next year to come to the Scottish grant. Now, if they cut the grant by £4 billion, the Scottish Government will have to find that money from somewhere. There will be services that it can't provide and things that it can't do. It also needs to be noted that there's already resentment in England. I mean, they get very upset about prescription charges for some reason. I mean, they like governments to keep prescription charges in place and then complain about it. But they're very upset that we don't pay for prescription charges. Now, the problem with paying for prescription charges is it is a form of taxation, and it's not a very efficient form of taxation. I mean, that's what they always say to you. I mean, that's what Ruth Davidson said when she said we should bring them back into Scotland. Most people won't pay for them. And you think, well, in that case, why bring them back in? You just need to recruit bureaucrats and people to monitor it, to collect the money, to check that people that aren't entitled to it aren't claiming them when they're not entitled to them, and so on. It doesn't actually. It's the same with the tuition fees in England. They put the tuition fees off, and what they've discovered now is that they have to get a 48% return of students paying back the student loans for the tuition fees. What it's running at, they have to get a 45% return on it. What it's running at is an actual 48%. If it drops any further, the system they've put in place of tripling the tuition fees will actually result in costing them more, while individuals are still penalised for doing it. It's just madness. And apart from anything else, the problem with block grant is that it's completely undignified for any parliament or any nation to have to effectively go cap in hand and rely on somebody else to say, there's your pocket money, that's your money for the year. We need to have control of our revenue raising and our expenditure so we can set our priorities, so that we can decide what we need to prioritise and what we need to spend money on. We shouldn't have to exist on handouts from Westminster, which they can reduce at any point if they want to. And I mean, since I started writing this earlier this week, and since then there's been another scare story. Ian Duncan Smith popped up to tell us that, you know, if you vote for independence, you're going to be forced to cut welfare payments. Because obviously welfare payments are not going to be cut if we vote no when we stay in the UK. I mean, this is the man who gave us the breadline tax. This is the man whose welfare reform has led to hundreds of thousands of people going to food banks. And then when they get told that hundreds of thousands of people are in food banks, they say, well, they don't really need to go there. They're all on the make. They're all just going there to get free food. You know, everybody's suffering under this, you know. This is a mentality that seems alien to me. And it's also been revealed in the Daily Record, I think yesterday, that Margaret Thatcher, 30 years ago, this has been just released on the 30-year rule, that she was busy with John Redwood and David Willetts, I think it is, who's in the current government, was trying to take £500 million out of the Scottish Office budget in secret, so nobody would know that they'd cut the budget. Because they were worried that it might upset the Scots. You know, they might get upset if we take £500 million off them, and they might go and vote for the SNP. Now, I suppose you could call it progress, because what we now have, 30 years on, is we have the Scottish Tories, and I have to say the Scottish Labour Party, telling us that they're going to take £4 billion out of the grant next year. So now they don't do it in secret, they're open about it, blatant about it, which, again, that's not really great progress, is it? Which is why I think that absolutely we need to control our own parliament, we need to control our own destiny, we need to control our own finances, and we need to be a nation again. And I couldn't find anything better to say on that subject than reading Derek Bateman's blog this morning, when he said, his summary of the Yes vote was that we regain our independence, we take back our nationhood, we reclaim national self-respect, and take our rightful place in the world, shaping policies around our own ideals, and standing tall in our own right beside the other nations as equals. Now, I can't think of a better summary for why we should vote yes. So I would say to you that the time is now, it's the 18th of September, we need to vote yes, and if the time is not now, then when will it be? And if it's not us that are going to vote for it, who will vote for it? So vote yes.